Okay, so I wanted to make a little video as to how I know that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. And I was inspired by a couple other people that have made videos, namely Ryan X. Charles, Connor Murray, Joshua Henslee, all people that have influenced me to make this video for the record. So you may be asking, who am I? Well, I'm a musician and an entrepreneur, and my journey into Bitcoin started in 2017. And I was living in New York and working as a sound engineer, trying to break into music. And I just got very interested in this technology. I've always been, very technologically oriented. And I was really wondering, like, all right, I've heard about Bitcoin, Ethereum, all this stuff for a couple of years now, and I just want to kind of figure it out. So I asked a friend of mine on Twitter, what's this all about? How can I learn about it? And he directed me to read some articles by Daniel Krawisz, who has been around for a long time and has written a lot of very interesting articles. So I started reading Daniel's stuff and watching his videos, and that started to kind of give me a sense of the history of crypto. And when I first heard about Craig Wright, this was 2017, after the Bitcoin Cash fork, but before BSV existed as a ticker. And so I heard about this guy. He's in the Bitcoin Cash space, and he was extremely unlikable from a certain perspective. And I saw, I heard about all the Wired article doxing him as Satoshi, and it was kind of in the period where he was reluctantly kind of having to defend himself. And so I started taking some notice, and I started watching his videos and his lectures. And my reaction was that this guy is difficult to understand, but clearly he knew a lot about Bitcoin. And again, I was completely new, and I'm not really a technical person. So as I was watching his videos and I was watching, talks from other people, it just started to dawn on me. I was thinking, this guy understands this better than most. And the only other person I could kind of compare him to at that time was Daniel Krawisz, who also, to me, clearly seemed to know more about it and understand it better than anyone else. And everybody else that I was looking at was talking about Bitcoin as a speculative asset. They were basically only concerned with its scalability and technical, whatever, all the problems that needed to be sorted. They were looking at it entirely from the perspective of how is this going to be worth more money, more dollars in the future. So, that is not really appealing to me. In fact, it's the opposite. It makes me look down on it. But from Daniel and then from Craig, I started to understand that actually Bitcoin is a lot more. Not only is it a lot more, it's so much more that these other people have not even touched on. They've not even appeared to think about it that way. So I started looking more, and I started to understand the history of the different forks and the block size debate. And having gone into it basically, with no prior understanding, the block size debate was very easy for me. Big blocks, that's it. I mean, I didn't even need to be convinced, because the small block argument was just not very compelling at all. And it fell into that kind of almost scammy, speculative kind of attitude, right? So that was the initial steps. Now, I was not convinced. I was not convinced for a long time, even into the hash war, so-called hash war, between BSV and BCH. And even in the lead up to BSV, I was a supporter of BSV because I kind of aligned with the vision, but I wasn't convinced that Craig was Satoshi. And after the fork happened, I didn't have any BCH. I guess I had some from the prior BCH fork, but I went and I bought some BCH just to have some BSV after the fork. And I got it on Coinbase, and then I noticed that Coinbase wasn't trying to integrate BSV at all. And basically I had to move the BSV off Coinbase immediately. And then I started to see that all these different figures in the crypto world, supposedly respectable people, were delisting BSV. They were attempting to suppress it. And the reasoning for it had nothing to do with the technology itself, but entirely to do with Craig Wright. And then I started to notice that the narrative around Craig Wright was itself very flawed, because all the main arguments against Craig Wright are that I'll break it down into two things. So the two things are, one, that he's not technically knowledgeable, that he's not as smart as he claims he is, that he has like fraudulent college degrees and all that. And the second claim is that he goes around claiming that he's Satoshi Nakamoto. And even when I didn't believe that he was, or I was still a little skeptical because his personality was so difficult to kind of understand, neither of those claims really made that much sense. Now, the first one I kind of get, because he's constantly, he talks about his credentials, and he talks like somebody who, if you didn't know what he was talking about, you would think he's just making a lot of it up. And he's kind of, like he may not sound credible if you didn't understand what he was saying. And I get that. The second thing, that he goes around claiming he's Satoshi, didn't make sense to me at all, because I understood that he was doxxed. I understood that he was not a public person before he was made to be a public person by Wired magazine. And I started noticing some very suspicious things, like the fact that his home was raided by like the Australian police on the day that the Wired magazine article came out, and then all the delistings were happening, and it just seemed really suspicious. Just seemed weird. Seemed like it was not, I wouldn't say coordinated, but that it was all very pointed. That the crypto world consensus was that this guy had to be blacklisted, he had to be made obscure, because why? I couldn't tell you, but they were clearly threatened, or they didn't. The funny thing too is that most of the crypto world claims to be this censorship resistant, very free thinker kind of ideology, and yet they were completely trying to blacklist the most interesting guy. So that just got me kind of thinking. And then, and I apologize for noises outside. It's very noisy here in downtown LA. And clearly I don't have a script. I'm just going off the cuff here because I think the subject is important. So, okay, so then I was listening to Craig, and I started hearing a lot of concepts from him that were apparently like the first time that any of these types of things have been talked about. So I don't remember anybody really discussing micropayments before Craig, or the idea that micropayments were the main type of transaction, right? And at the same time, and I was very skeptical. I wanted to figure it out. So I was reading the white paper. I was looking at the early Satoshi posts. I was doing my best to try and figure it out objectively. But the more I kept looking into it, the more I kept trying to understand Bitcoin and what the creator's intent was and all that, the more I started to realize that Craig was making more sense than anybody. And that the people that listened to Craig and had more technical knowledge than me were also making more sense than anybody. So it was trickling down from him. Then, before I was convinced, I started using BSV. And I was blown away. And I had messed around a little bit with BTC and Ethereum before. They didn't stand a chance competitively. The technology and the user experience and everything, virtually everything that you want from digital cash was much better on BSV. And the first time I sent, from one wallet to another, 1 cent and half a cent, I was really blown away. And I started seeing all kinds of innovation in the space, in the first year. It's gone on since, but in that first year, I just started seeing services and, enthusiasm from the community that just didn't even appear to exist in Ethereum or BTC. Because the more I learned about those coins, the more I realized that the only thing that most of those people are concerned with is making the price go up, the number go up. Excuse me. When is the price going up? How do the price go up? And if the price isn't going up, let's make tokens that go up instead. And I'm looking at Ethereum, and I'm seeing thousands of random tokens. And I couldn't even, is just my bullshit detector was going off the charts. I was just like, how is this even, in what world is this the future? Thousands of competing tokens that bring no value, right? Other than their trade value in another currency. It just didn't make any sense. Then, the more I looked into it. So I started to, because the main skeptical point that I had was the technical knowledge part. I was like, okay, Craig seems very smart, but maybe he's, getting these ideas from somewhere else, or, a lot of the skepticism in like 2017, 2018 was like, okay, maybe he was part of the team that made Bitcoin. He was one of many people. He was like part of a group, so maybe he's just the most vocal, the last one alive, whatever, right? He's just like the one guy who's talking, and maybe he's not actually the genius, right? But then there's a great video that I highly recommend that Connor Murray put out a while ago called the Craig Wright Timeline, or the Craig Wright History, whatever it's called. And it kind of goes through, as many of the public internet interactions that you can find about Craig Wright, specifically the ones prior to his doxing. And they were really interesting. One, it's hardly a major thing, but there's like an interaction between him and Julian Assange on the cypherpunks mailing list from like 1996. And I was like, well, that's interesting. That's the type of history that maybe the creator of Bitcoin might have, an argument with Julian Assange over capitalism in 1996, right? Then, there was the great talk with him and Nick Szabo and some of these other guys in like 2015. And, if you watch that talk and you try to put yourself in the mindset like, all right, what if this guy is Satoshi, but he's trying to not, out himself? That talk takes on a totally different light, I mean, everything he's saying is years and years ahead of all these other people, okay? Especially Nick Szabo, because, so I was finding that when I would talk about Bitcoin and who is Satoshi, etc., these really intelligent people I knew, many of whom were like actual computer scientists and programmers and friends of mine, they were like, well, it's clearly Nick Szabo. And I was just like, what? Like, where? How? Where? What are you even talking about? How is that even? Like, where? Why? So basically, what I started to understand is that the whole crypto world is guided by narratives and like meme thinking, where people see something and they just internalize it, and that becomes their view. And definitely the more I understood about Ethereum and, for example, the difference between proof of stake, proof of work, an account-based model versus UTXOs, the more I tried to understand this stuff, and then there's that video of like Vitalik calling out Craig, I just started to look at this and I was like, well, this is clearly like a cultish kind of mindset of people that are not really that interested in understanding what Bitcoin or cryptocurrency means as like a economic data system or anything. It's like they couldn't get past the veneer of it, right? Because to my understanding at that time, most of the young people that I knew were really into Ethereum because Ethereum appeared to be the futuristic kind of sleek thing, right? and they couldn't seem to get past that, because I could see that most of the other coins, there might have been like a large audience of people, down here that were trying to, just like be a part of it or make money or whatever. But really, most of the coins, including BTC, were controlled by a small faction that were completely kind of ideologically based, and that they were trying to spread their ideology to the people at the bottom, and that they were essentially gatekeeping, any sort of imagination or like real thought about the system, right? Like even Ethereum, it called itself the world computer. I mean, like to the average person, that's like, whoa, world computer, what's that, So I just could tell that the narratives were really wacky. And I don't want to go on too long because I'll just be rambling. But so the thing that really kind of pushed me. Okay, I guess it's two things. One, just to finish my earlier point on Craig's credentials. Well, so from the Conor Murray video and then doing a little bit more research, I mean, there's like a great video somewhere. You can find it. It's kind of hard to find, I think. But it's like a video of Craig talking about supercomputers, or like doing like an online lecture about supercomputers from like 2009 or previous or whatever. Man, that video, okay, like look, I'm no technical expert, but I know enough, and I have a basic understanding of math and computer science and all this kind of stuff. That lecture could not be given by somebody who didn't really know what the hell they were talking about. I mean, that video alone kind of made me just go, whoa, okay, this guy is not playing. This is not a half-wit. This is not a mid-wit. This is not a low IQ guy framing himself to be a smart guy like most of the crypto space appeared to be, to me. Okay? So I started being like, all right, yeah, he's actually pretty smart, okay? Which, maybe kind of, I don't even know how that comes off now, because so many people appear to be convinced that he's not a smart guy, which is just crazy to me. And the more I listened to him, one of my very best friends growing up was autistic, okay? So I could recognize the similarities in their tendencies, and I could also recognize that, my friend growing up, a lot of what he would say would sound like nonsense or very difficult to understand, or you couldn't connect, all this kind of stuff. So I kind of brought that experience. I tried to listen to Craig with a very open mind. And I realized that his knowledge and the message, what he was trying to convey, was one, not about number go up and speculation, but entirely about trying to make people understand real value, real economic theory, real history, real kind of moral principles, like what is a good economic system truly, versus like Ethereum, which kind of has a false morality, right? Where it's trying to convince you that this is the ideal way, right? And that goes into that kind of code is law argument, right? So a lot of these arguments that Craig was making, for example, code is law, right? I mean, that I just had no understanding of that when I first was listening to him. Code is law. What does that even mean? But I did my own research. I read a lot. I started studying. He inspired me to look into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I recognized how truthful and honest he actually was. Okay? My final point, okay, and this has to do with just the kind of, because Bitcoin is an economic system. It's also a a system that is very attuned to a proper incentive model, and as a result is very based in game theory, okay, and just in like principles of life, and as Daniel has pointed out, like very tied to even like biological principles and things like that. So one thing that just really tipped me over the edge was just how hard are all these people trying to discredit him. I mean, think about that. Think about the people in history, okay, I don't have to name them, that have been hated by the masses or have been tried to, not even hated by the masses, because Craig is not hated by the masses. It's another thing to understand. But he has been blacklisted. Think about the people in history, okay, that have been blacklisted, that have been tried, have been repressed, have been, shouted down and made to be discredited, okay? Think about that, and think about why that was, and that there is typically no example in history of a person who's being crucified on a large scale that was that had a lot of merit in the way that they think this has merit. Okay? Now, as a final point, I wish everybody would really look into why Craig Wright is called a scam or a fraud. Okay? I wish people would look into why Satoshi Nakamoto might not be a good move for a lot of reasons for him to publicly sign the coins, all the kind of basic arguments that people level against him, that they've been saying, repeating for years and years and years, even though he's done hundreds of hours of talks and lectures that can elucidate Bitcoin for you, okay? And I just hope that people can look into it, and I think that's happening. Every day I see more people that are waking up, and I hope that the world will wake up soon. But the great thing about BSV is that it's actually so good. It's actually so futuristic and so powerful and so modular and anti-fragile and just so, hyperstitioning its own future that it doesn't even matter, because eventually, as Daniel Krawisz says, everybody will be sucked into the black hole of Bitcoin. Now, I hope that happens sooner rather than later, and that's really dependent on people. But until that happens, we're in a prolonged, social game, right? And I appreciate that Craig, despite his, abrasive personality, is choosing to kind of not play the social game like everybody else in crypto, and is instead, trying to prove things in court, writing papers, filing patents. He's doing things like a real computer scientist, like a real inventor. Okay? And, he's not perfect. He's a human. He's certainly not, I can't even say he's not ideal, because I've learned more from this guy than anybody else in crypto, along with Daniel. But, he's a man. He's a real guy, okay? And the more you give him the benefit of being a real person, who who happens to have, you know, prodigious intelligence, okay, and clear acumen, the more you are open to that, the more sense everything he says is going to start to make, okay? And as I said, BSV is that good. Craig could disappear today, God forbid, but Craig could disappear today. All of the BSV entrepreneurs of today could disappear, and BSV would still be the superior system, and some young entrepreneurs would still make something great out of it, okay? And that's all I have to say. And I truly believe at this point, and it's been, you know, for me about 2 years now, that I have been, you know, 100% confident, and I'll even say 99.99999% confident, because I believe in a probabilistic way of thinking, okay? But Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody else comes close. There is no second contender. There is nobody else. There is nobody else who comes even close. Thanks for watching, and you know, I was really inspired to make this based on everybody else's videos, and hopefully I can you know, come up with more topics to make videos on, and things to do, but let's see. So if you watch this, thank you very much.